Alright guys, in this video we're going to be talking about how a complete beginner can get into saltwater fishing today. Make sure you watch to the end. So when I was getting into saltwater fishing, one thing I noticed is that a lot of channels will give you a single tip and then they just move on. So what you're left with is a patchwork of knowledge with a lot of gaps in it that you have to put together yourself. So you really, while you might be learning something, you're not really taking anything from the video. So what I'm going to do here is put together the tips that I wish somebody would have told me whenever I transferred over from bass fishing to saltwater fishing. You know, learn what you need to learn along the way and kind of cut out some of the mistakes that I made when I was getting into saltwater fishing. So I'm going to assume in this video that if you're watching this, you already have a base in some kind of fishing, whether that be fly fishing or bass fishing or catfishing or whatever you're into. I'm going to assume that you already know a little bit about fishing and why fish do what they do. So don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to learning a new kind of fishing. Fish are still fish. They still eat fish. They still need shelter. They still like warm water. They all have their own things, of course. Every species is different, but not everything is different. Saltwater fishing isn't drastically different than bass fishing. You're just targeting a different species. So don't reinvent the wheel whenever you're first trying to get into saltwater fishing. So the first thing I'm going to tell you guys is start with what you know, right? When I came from bass fishing, I looked at saltwater and I was like, man, I don't even know where to start. But really we do. Bass like rocks, right? You fish rock walls all the time. Rock structures, smallmouth bass, all kinds of fish love rocks. If you see a rock wall, fish it. Chances are it still has fish, just a different kind, right? Start with what you know, take the concepts that you already understand and apply those to the new kind of fishing, and you'll be so much more successful and have a lot more confidence in what you're doing to where you won't be questioning yourself every other cast saying, well, am I not catching fish because I'm not doing something right, or are they just not here? You know what I mean? Start with the basics that you already have an understanding of and work up from there to get to where you can actually, have a feeling for what's right and what's not when it comes to inshore fishing. All right, next I want to debunk a myth that I hear from a lot of people is, I just don't have saltwater equipment, I don't know what lures to use, I don't have a saltwater reel, I don't have blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. You can make as many excuses as you want, but you don't need all the fancy saltwater only equipment to catch fish in salt water. People take that word and they make it mean so much more than this. Oh, it's saltwater fishing. It's really not. The first redfish I ever caught was on my first ever trip by myself trying to get inshore. I decided, I hear redfish are fun to fight. I hear they're fun to catch. I'm going to mix it up from bass fishing. I had a cheap Walmart spinning reel that I used for bass fishing, and I caught my first redfish on a Texas rig zoom worm on the flats. Tell me one person who's ever thrown a zoom worm for redfish. And that's my point exactly. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to have all the saltwater lures and the saltwater reels and a saltwater flats boat and everything to get into saltwater fishing. Most of the stuff you have will work. Now, granted, a zoom worm is probably not the best bait for redfish, right? It's just, I was like, hey, bass eat it, why wouldn't redfish, I figured it looked something bounce on the bottom, so I gave it a shot. There's obviously better lures you can throw, but my point in saying all this is that you don't have to overanalyze your equipment. What you have will work more than likely, and with just a few lures added to your box, you can catch saltwater fish. So the next thing you're really going to need to figure out is where to fish. The ocean is huge. This isn't a pond or a lake where it's like, well, I can walk around a circle and just fish everywhere. You really have to get down to, where do you fish? If you're looking at a bait, you need to know what to target. So like I said earlier, start with what you already know, right? Fish like structure, fish like things that are different. So when you're targeting these saltwater fish for the first time, look for things like creek mouths. If you're fishing a grass flat, get on Google Maps and look for potholes, where it's just a round bit of sand in between the grass. Fish hold to those. Look for rocks, look for piers, look at docks. Docks are a really big one. There's docks everywhere. Bass like docks, and if you flipped for bass under docks, you can flip under docks for saltwater fish. Trout, redfish, flounder, they all hang under those docks. And it's really not that much harder to catch them. As far as docks go, I will give you some tips real quick. You're going to want to fish usually the first and the last dock at the end of a line of docks, the heaviest, because that's the first relief a fish runs into. So say a fish is swimming for 4 miles and there's no docks at all. When it gets to that first one, he's going to be really, really hesitant to leave because he doesn't know, is there more that way? Are there any the other way I came from? So he's going to cling to that relief because it provides protection from predators like dolphins and sharks and whatever else may be chasing him out there, and fishermen too, of course. So another thing about docks you can look at is how old does that dock look? Newer docks really don't have an ecosystem built around them yet, whereas older docks are covered in barnacles. They have bait fish there, they probably have lights, fish hang out there every night. The more barnacles, the more age a dock has, the higher chance it has to hold fish and the more fish it's going to hold. So that's my tips on docks, and really my tips on just finding structure all around. Stick to what you know and build on that. Think like a fish, the same way you would in any other kind of fishing. All right, next I'm going to give you guys some lessons that I learned the hard way whenever I started saltwater fishing. First off, these are not bass, right? You hook a bass, you can drag him in, get his head above the water, he'll come up. These fish fight. There's not a fish in saltwater that doesn't fight. There's fish this big in saltwater that fight harder than a 5-pound bass. I guarantee that, and if you get into saltwater fishing, you'll learn that. Second of all, on that same subject of these fish fight, you need to have your drag set. Saltwater fishing is so much different as far as drag comes than freshwater fishing is. I kayak fished bass tournaments for years, traveled and fished. I've caught more bass than probably most people you know. I'm going to be honest. I did a lot of bass fishing, and I never had to use drag. There was rarely ever a bass that could pull my drag, and if it was a 10-pound bass that probably could have pulled drag, my line was strong enough that I didn't really need it. They don't fight that hard. You know, a redfish this long fights harder than a 10-pound bass all day, any day, every day, right? So make sure your drag is one solid pull. If you have to put too much force to pull that drag out, it's too tight, and they're gonna break you off. I'm telling you, these fish are a different breed. They fight different, and you need to make sure your drag is ready to let them have some slack, right? Beyond that, kind of an obvious one here, but I kind of messed up with it at first. Saltwater fish have teeth. 90% of them have teeth. Even if you can't see them, they have teeth. Their gills are like razors. They will cut you. Saltwater fish are dangerous. You need to get some fish grips, and you need to be aware of how to handle each fish before you go fishing. If you're going to go out kayak fishing in saltwater, make sure you look at the species that are kind of in that area, what you can expect to catch, and make sure you know the threats, how they fight, what they feel like, just so you're better at catching them, but also how to handle those fish and deal with them once you get them in the boat, because they will mess you up. All right, this is probably the one I struggled with the most whenever I was getting into saltwater fishing, and it was just trusting the process and having faith that I was going to catch fish. See, I was so used to bass fishing for so long that I could go out, and I still can. I can go bass fishing for 12 hours and not catch a single bass and still know that what I'm doing is the correct thing, right? It's easy for me to do that because I'm good enough at bass fishing and I've caught enough bass that I know, hey, I'm throwing this lure, it catches fish, there's just not fish here. Well, in that transfer to saltwater, somewhere along the way, I lost that, right? Because it's something new. You don't have that experience. You don't have the background to be able to pat yourself on the back and say, hey, I'm doing the right thing, right? So out there casting at the flats, there's no real targets like there was for bass. I didn't quite know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing at all. I just had the patchwork of knowledge from several miscellaneous YouTube videos. And so the whole time I'm out there casting, I'm like, man, is there no fish here? Or is it what I'm doing wrong? Am I using the right color? Am I throwing the right bait? Is my presentation wrong? Am I in the right spot? All these questions. You just have to take those, throw them out, get them out of the way, right? Pick a spot that looks good to you based on some intermediate fishing knowledge. Go there and fish it to the best of your ability, right? And I'm going to get in how to kind of hone in on some fish and make sure you're at least getting some bites to kind of back yourself up. But it takes time to build that kind of faith in yourself and your own skill. I can't remember when it happened for me for bass fishing, and we kind of don't. You just kind of say, oh, well, I'm good at fishing now. You don't really remember what led up to it. But there was a time when everyone watching this could not catch a bass to save their life. You had that first day where you caught 2 or 3 bass, and you were like, man, this is the best day of fishing ever, right? And you're going to get there with saltwater, but you have to just remember, hey, I wasn't always good at bass fishing. I'm not good at saltwater fishing yet, but I will get there, and have faith that the process is going to lead you to that. And eventually you'll gain the knowledge you need to get better and have more successful days on the water. All right, so the last tip I'm going to give is actually a tip on lure choice, right? And this is for the complete beginner that's going out there. And like I was talking about earlier, you're at risk of feeling disheartened if you don't catch any fish. I'm going to recommend you go buy several gulp lures. Swimming mullet, gulp shrimp, anything gulp will work. You can buy the tubs. They're kind of expensive. I'm not going to lie. They are expensive. And they are soft because they're a water-based plastic. You probably haven't used anything like that because they're not really a thing in freshwater fishing if you've done it, But, yeah, so what they are is they have smell infused all the way through. And, the smell on these lures is actually so good that literally you can take a piece of it and just put it on a hook and cast it out there and catch bait with just that piece of plastic. The smell is revolutionary. Props to Gulp for their smell. I wish their baits were a little bit tougher and didn't break so easy, but besides that, they work wonders. So what I'm going to tell you is don't go just buy what looks like a good lure. Don't go buy Miradines, like jerk baits for saltwater fishing, because you don't trust yourself to throw those yet, right? It's like throwing a new crankbait for bass fishing. If you have a crankbait that catches 10 bass in a day and you've done that several times over, you know it. When you buy a new crankbait, you throw it for an hour, you don't catch fish, you're like, man, I'm going to go back to that bait that was working because I'm not about this life. Well, it's kind of the same thing. If you throw that little saltwater crankbait, you don't catch anything, you're like, man, is this the right way? So what these gulps are going to do is you're going to catch a lot of trash fish, small fish, bait fish, white trout, you know, croakers, pinfish. You're going to catch a lot of just miscellaneous stuff. You're going to foul hook a lot of stuff. You'll probably catch some crabs. You'll catch everything. But you'll also catch those big redfish, those flounder, those trout, snook if you're further down in Florida. All the inshore fish will eat these. But the bonus is with that scent, you're getting a lot of bycatch too. So it kind of helps you stay up, and make you feel like you're actually doing what you need to do because you're getting action. Whether it be the fish you're after or not, you're getting bites. You're getting bites. So you're going to feel like you're actually fishing instead of just casting at the ocean, right? Because that's how it feels sometimes. You're just throwing at open water and you don't really have a grasp on whether or not that holds fish. So having a bait that's going to trigger some strikes from even just some smaller, less significant fish has a tremendous boost on your morale for the day and how you feel about spending your time fishing out. Finally, all I'm going to say, man, is that the only thing you can do to learn saltwater fishing is get out there and try it. Take what I've told you today, do your best to understand it, watch the video back, pause, go back if you have to, and just go saltwater fishing. Right? It's going to take you a few trips like any kind of fishing, but you can do it. Anybody can do it. And honestly, it's easier than bass fishing. Because if you got a hungry fish and you put it in his face, it really doesn't matter what you're throwing. He's going to eat it. The hardest part's finding the fish in saltwater. And it's kind of opposite of bass fishing that way. So, again, I'm going to say it one more time for the people in the back. Just go fishing. You'll figure it out. And I wish you the best of luck. If you enjoyed the video, and if you learned something, I would really appreciate you dropping a subscription for me, liking the video, drop a comment. I reply to every comment on all my videos. I'm really trying to kick this thing off, so anything you can do helps. Thank you.